Okay, now we're going to move on to chapter 11. And chapter 11 is going to be extremely similar to chapter 10 in that we're just working through crosstabs once again, trying to figure out if there's a relationship between two variables. So again, this is going to continue the bivariate relationship unit in this course. So we're going to start doing the exact same thing that we did in chapter 10. So we're going to start running crosstabs between different variables, and we're just going to kind of go through the book and work through some of their examples. So the first example that they want us to look at is examining the relationship between party or political orientation as well as political views. So we're basically going to be looking at whether or not someone defines themselves as Democrat, Independent, Republican, or other, and if that is a predictor of somebody's political views, so liberal, moderate, or conservative. So we're going to go into descriptives, crosstabs, and you can see I still have up here what we were doing in chapter 10. So we need to get rid of all of that. Again, make sure you use the data set that I had posted in Module 6 because some of these variables are variables that they had us recode in Chapter 7. And if you didn't save that data set, then they're already recoded here for you. So again, we're looking at the effect of party identification on political views. So party identification is our independent variable. And then we're going to look at political views, the recoded one. So they're looking at full rec. Make sure your cells in the cells box, that column is checked. Click OK. And you will see this table right here. And so again, our recoded party, our recoded political party is across the top or in our columns, and our dependent variable, which is our recoded political views, are in our rows. And so if you look across this, you're trying to determine whether or not there is a relationship. So if you look across, you can see Democrats are most likely to identify as being liberal. In the second row, you can see that independents are most likely to be considered moderate. And on the bottom, you see that Republicans are most likely to be conservative. So you could argue that there is a relationship here, that there is a pretty strong relationship between one's political party and their political views, which isn't surprising because if you are familiar with politics, you know Democrats and liberal are kind of used interchangeably, as well as conservatives and Republican are used interchangeably at times. We would also argue that this is a pretty strong positive relationship. Remember we talked about if you have this diagonal here where you have the highest category along these diagonals, you would say that it was a strong relationship. The reason it's a strong positive relationship is how we recoded it. So Democrat and liberal were recoded as 1, where Republican and conservative were recoded as 3. So as values increase on both these variables, you see, or in one variable, you see values increase on this variable. So as you move from 1 to 2 to 3, you see 1 to 2 to 3 that these increase as well. So there is a pretty strong relationship here between party and political views. Now, the book wants you to go through and switch these switch these as an independent variable and dependent variable. So instead of having party as your independent variable, they now want you to have party as your dependent variable. And instead of political views as your dependent variable, they want that to be your independent variable. Go ahead and click cells, just double check the columns checked. Click that. And now what you'll see is the columns and the rows have switched. And so you'll see liberal, moderate, and conservative here on your columns because that's your independent variable, and Democrat, Independent, Republican as your dependent variable. And if you go across again, you'll see Democrat and liberal are very, very similar or very high. Your independents oftentimes associated with your moderate political views. Your Republicans are affiliated with your conservative views. And so again, we come to pretty much the same conclusion. You see these high numbers across this diagonal right here. And so again, Democrats are more likely to be liberal, moderates are more likely to be independent, and Republicans are more likely to be conservative. Demonstration 11.3 is asking us to look at age and how that impacts political views. So again, come down to descriptives, your crosstabs. We're going to click out of these. Political rec is now going to be your dependent variable, and we're going to go up to age cat. And age cat is now going to be our independent variable. So we're looking to see if age predicts whether one is liberal, moderate, or conservative. So click OK. You'll come down here. Again, you're just going to look across the crosstabs. You'll see 65 and older are about 10% less likely to be liberal than 21 and older, or 21 and younger, excuse me. Across the moderate, you're not seeing a really big change, about a 6% change between the crowds. Here you see a little bit between 40 and 64, you see roughly a 9% change. And then in conservatives, you see about a 16% difference between under 21 and 65 and older. So what one could argue is that people who are younger, people who are under 21, are more likely to affiliate with the liberal and the moderate crowd, whereas the older individuals, your 40 to 64, or 40 to and 65 and older, are more likely to affiliate with the conservative ideation or the conservative views. Again, what the book wants you to do in 11.4 is come to crosstabs. Sorry, it's going really slow for some reason. Go to crosstabs, and instead of having political views, actually go to party. And so to see if people identify as Republican, Democrat, independent, or other. And what you will see when we scroll down here is, you look across, you will see pretty much the same thing. So 65 and older are actually more likely to label themselves as Democrat. Your younger crowd is more likely to label themselves as an independent. That's pretty robust, actually. People under 40 are very likely to name themselves or label themselves as independent. And your Republican crowd are more likely to be 65 and older. So again, you're just kind of looking at the crosstabs and determining whether or not there's any patterns. So you can make a prediction on if you know age, or you're going to be able to predict somebody's political ideation. The next series of crosstabs that the book walks you through is looking at religion and whether or not religious preference can dictate whether or not can help predict whether or not you identify as a liberal, moderate, conservative, or identify as a Democrat, independent, or Republican, or an other affiliation. So we can close out of this output. Before we do this, if you look at the religion, come to variable view, and you're going to come down here and look at religion. And I have already recoded this, but you will see that in religion, they're trying to collapse it a little bit by making some categories like don't know, missing values. So you're going to want to come in here and make sure that you have a range. Any range from 5 to 99 is now going to be missing variables. And also 0 is going to be missing variables. So instead of putting discrete missing values in here, because you only have 3 boxes to do this, you can have a range, and then if you have to add one other variable, you can, and you can denote that as missing. That is already done for you if you open the data set in that was in Canvas for you. So if you've done that, you don't have to worry about doing this. So again, we're going to go back to crosstabs. We're going to go to descriptives, come down to crosstabs, and we are going to look at religion as our independent variable. So if we come down here to religion, and we're going to examine first your political views. Again, your cells are already checked, or your columns are already checked. If you scroll down a little bit, you can start looking across these categories again. So you will see oftentimes people who are Jewish or identify as having no religion, they are extremely likely to be or to identify as having liberal political views. People who are conservative are more likely to identify with the Protestant religion. Also, if you look across the board here, moderate is pretty even, except when it comes to Jewish. You will see they hover around that 35% mark. You do have a kind of an uptick here with Catholic actually identifying as moderate. Going to do the same thing, but instead of looking at political views, we're going to come down and look at party identification. So if you go to party, click over there, and now you will see the rows have changed, and that's now your actual party identification. So again, you will see Jewish people who identify their religious preferences Jewish are actually more likely to identify as Democrat than any others. The rest of these are pretty comparable, roughly 35 and 37. Independents are most likely to be identified as Catholic or no religious affiliation. Republicans, again, like the conservatives you see, are most likely to be Protestant, and then others pretty low across the board. So again, Jewish people are more likely to affiliate as Democrat, whereas Protestants are more likely to identify as Republican. So again, like I said before in the last video, they go over a ton of these. So we're just going to keep going through, hammering through. The more that you see, the more that this will start to kind of sink in and you will be able to see it. So the next demonstration that we're going to do is we're going to look at sex and gender as our independent variable, so our predictor variable. So it goes in columns. We're going to look at both party, so Democrat, Republican, Independent, and other, and your political views, so political rec, so liberal, moderate, and conservative, and see if gender can actually pick out whether or not you're going to fall in one of these categories. So again, you'll see we only, excuse me, you get stuck sometimes, there you go. You'll see first when we look at party identification, females are more likely to identify as Democrat, whereas males are more likely to identify as independent, and males and females are extremely comparable on Republican. So we could argue more females than males are going to be Democrat, but other than that, there's not a really strong difference between the genders when it comes to your political ideation. When looking at political views, whether it's liberal, moderate, or conservative, this is a good example, again, of showing that there's really no difference. You're looking at a 4% difference here, which isn't very substantial. This is less than 1%, and this is just a little bit over 3%. So there's not really a substantial difference between males and females when you look at the recoded political views. Another thing that we might be interested in is not just that gender can predict one's political views, but race may also predict one's political views. So I'm actually going to combine here demonstration 11.8 and 11.9, because we're already looking at party and we're already looking at political views. And now I'm just going to enter race. So enter race in here. Again, if you go to cells, columns will stay the same. Pop this in here. This first one is actually 11.9 if you're following in the book on page 183. So you're looking at white, black, and other to see if there's a difference. there's absolutely a very stark difference if you look at the Democrats. Black respondents are much more likely than white respondents or other respondents to identify as a Democrat. If you look down at independents, you will see that whites and other races are more likely to identify as independent, and blacks are less likely. And when you look at Republicans, you can see Republicans are much more likely to be white individuals rather than black or other races. So you would argue that there is a racial differential, particularly in this first row, that this is a pretty substantial number, that 71.4% of people who identify as black are more likely to also identify as Democrat. If you scroll down to political views, you will see that these differences kind of dissipate a bit. So if you look across liberal, you'll see there's not a substantial difference between white, black, and other. Even amongst moderate, there's not a huge difference. You're looking at, maybe between white and black. Blacks are a little more likely to identify as moderate than whites. As well as blacks are more likely to identify as moderate than other people identify as other race. Conservatives, again, blacks are less likely than whites or people who identify as another race to also identify themselves as conservative. So again, these tables are actually not that difficult to really kind of go through. You just go and really kind of hammer it out. You're just basically describing your results and seeing if there is any pattern. So demonstration 11.10 on page 184 lets us go back a little bit and kind of look at how we recode. So it's always nice to revisit. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So in this example, they want us to recode education. So they actually eventually want to look at whether or not one's educational level impacts their political views as well as their political party. So remember, when we recode variables, we go to transform and we always recode into a different variable. Also, I always right click here and hit this variable names, and I also put them sort alphabetically. Just that way it's a little bit easier. So our original variable for education is education here. But actually, before we do that, we need to come to our variable view, which we are, and we need to scroll up and find education, which is right here, and we need to see how education is measured. So remember, you can click on this little box and see how education is measured. And so what you will see when you click on this, oops, excuse me. So you're going to see this box that has 97, 98, 99, don't know. What that means is that they are allowing the numbers in the education category to just stand for the grades. So 1 stands for first grade, 2 stands for second grade, 3 stands for third grade, 4 stands for fourth grade, etc., etc., etc. When you get to years 13, 14, and 15, that would be considered college, as well as 16 would be considered your undergraduate college, or you'd be college graduate because they're counting 4 years of college. And then anything after 16 would be considered graduate work. And so if you come here and you look at the data view, you will see when you look at education, you'll see 16, 12, 12, 12, 13, 16, 19. So this 16 in row 1 would mean that this individual is a college graduate because they've completed the 4 years of K through 12, and then they've also completed 4 years of college. These 12s would be high school graduates. 13 would be some college, if they went to college for a year. 19 would be that they had 3 years post undergrad, so they were in some type of graduate program for at least 3 years, and so forth. This 4 would say that they had a 4th grade education, the respondents. The 0 would say that they didn't go to school, that they never had gone to school. So that's what that category looks like. So knowing that, we can come down here and recode into different variables. Again, right click, display variable names, right click, sort alphabetically. Come down here and, oops, excuse me, hit education. And they want you to recode it EDCAT And just for the book, I'm going to have you go ahead and do that. Again, I would have recoded this RECEDUC. In your label, put recoded education, click change. You're going to have old and new values. Again, I always hit system and user missing, hit add first, just so I don't forget. And now we're going to indicate what our ranges are. And if you look at how they want you to recode education, they want less than high school graduate, some college graduate, and graduate school. So what you can do is, if you're doing less than high school, you can start from the lowest range. So this is going to be basically 0 up through 11. Because remember, if you have 12, that is a high school graduate. So 0 up to 11 is going to be recoded as 1, and that would be less than high school. Then value 12, because that's high school graduate, is going to be coded as 2. Then they always have some college. You will see that studies always mix up between some college, or not mix up, but always distinguish between some college and actual college graduate. So you can hit 13, because that would be year after high school, through 15. So that would be 3 years of college. So not getting a undergraduate bachelor's degree. And that would be recoded as 3. And then college graduate would be 16. And you would recode that as 4. And then you're going to look at the range, and so you would go 17 through 20. And the reason you do that is because 20 is the highest value on that variable, and you'll recode it as 5. Make sure you click add. And so you should have 1 is less than high school, so 0 through 11. 2 should be, or 12 should now be 2, because that means a high school graduate. 13 through 15 should now be 3, because that's some college. 16 should now be 4, because that's a college graduate. And 17 through 20 should be 5, because that's some type of postgraduate work. Click continue. Click OK. And get rid of this output, because it's just telling you what you did. Click over to variable view. Scroll to the bottom, and you'll see that this is now at your bottom. And again, remember to go into your values. You're going to have 1 is less than high school. 2 is high school graduate. 3 is some college. 4 is college graduate. And 5 is graduate studies. And click OK. Now again, to double check this, you can run frequencies by coming here. And we won't do this for the sake of time, but you could run a frequency on education and then recoded education, which would be, EdCat is what they called it. So education and this EdCat, just to make sure the categories add up. But for purposes of time, I am not going to do that. So now that we have our new education category recoded, we want to go back to the crosstabs, because this unit, or this particular section, excuse me, my mouse is getting a little crazy. This section is looking at whether or not education, or that new EdCat variable, has an influence, or actually can predict one's political views. So we're going to keep political REC, because that's our political measure. We're going to come up here and put EdCat in here. So again, in columns, that's your independent variable. We're saying education level can actually predict one's political views. Make sure you check on the columns, make sure that percentage is there. Click OK. You'll see the crosstab table comes up right here. And let's look at the variables and the percentages right now. So as you go across, you'll see people with graduate studies, people who have an undergrad or beyond an undergraduate, are more likely to have liberal views. People with less than a high school or a high school education are more likely to consider themselves moderate by looking at these two categories. And college graduates are more likely to be conservative. So again, you're just reinterpreting, or you're interpreting the percentages in those columns. The last crosstab I'm going to do in this chapter is you're going to come to descriptive stats. Get out of ratio statistics. We don't want that. Get into descriptive stats, come down to crosstabs, get rid of the political rec, and put party in its place. So now we're having educational level predict one's party affiliation. If we scroll down, we can see those with graduate studies, so people beyond a bachelor's degree, are more likely to identify as Democrat. Again, high school and less than high school are more likely to identify as moderate. When you look at Republican, again, college graduates are more likely to identify as Republican. And again, you're just interpreting those percentages. The rest of Chapter 11 has you go through and do a couple other types of crosstabs. I think you guys are getting the point at this time, but if you want to go through and do that, you're more than welcome. They have you look at the role of marital status and political orientation, as well as social class and political orientation. But that is it for Chapter 12. Again, very, very, very similar to Chapter 10, or Chapter 11. I'm sorry, that was Chapter 11. Very similar to Chapter 10, but it did give you a little refresher on how to recode. If you have any questions, any concerns, please shoot me an email, give me a phone call, and I'll walk you through it. Thank you. Have a good day.